Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Black Mirror Season 7 Episode 1. It's called Common People. So, spoilers for the episode if you've not seen it. This kind of snuck up on me. I knew Season 7 of Black Mirror was on its way, but for whatever reason I did not know it was this week. So I would have tried to do this episode yesterday, but we're here today. We're going to talk about this episode starring Chris O'Dowd and Rashida Jones, who, I'm happy to see both of those actors. I like both of them quite a bit. Definitely, I think of them more both as comedic actors, especially Chris O'Dowd. But very curious going in to see what it was going to be doing. And the basic premise of this episode is the idea that someone in some sort of brain trauma incident, or in this case a tumor, is what she ends up having, but they're a married couple and she gets terminally ill, might never wake up again, but he has sold this new procedure to save her, which is going to have a subscription model because the part of the brain that they're going to replace relies on servers. It relies on cell service of this data coming in, and you have to pay monthly to keep this going. The surgery's free, but you're going to have to pay $300 a month. So that's the basic premise of the episode, and it kind of like evolves that as it goes on, and it does kind of bring in some other ideas. Typically, I would say that it's about basically just the living crisis. To boil it all down to one thing. Obviously, there's some specific things that it's also hitting on, like absurd medical costs, particularly in the US and other places that really kind of put people through the ringer to make it feel like they have to keep paying to even live. But I think it's really more of an analogy just for everything in general. This idea that costs keep going up, you keep being told that you need more things and that you're not good enough without. It's a running theme throughout the episode. Even Rashida Jones's character is a teacher and even has to talk to some kids who are being bullied for having old shoes and not having the nice new thing. And then you've also got the idea that they keep upping how much you pay, and you can stay on what you pay currently, but you're kind of a lesser person, or you're a common person, as the title of the episode gets. And it's hard not to think of subscription services in general just doing that. Like, hey, once upon a time it was just Netflix and it got you everything. Oh, now there's two tiers. You need the better tier to get the 4K or whatever. And now the base tier is actually got ads in it, right? And that's specifically something that kind of happens here, where she ends up saying ads, almost like a Truman Show style thing, where she just kind of starts saying commercials in her verbiage and doesn't even realize she's doing it. And it becomes a thing where, no, you have to upgrade to the better tier to get rid of the ads. And then there's the deluxe tier, which does these other things on top of that. And because we've got these new tiers, we have to make the old tiers worse to make the new ones run well. That's a big thing that it gets into. And I feel like it's dipping its toes in a few specific things. But like I said, I think it all kind of umbrella comes back to the idea of struggling to make ends meet, having to put yourself through an enormous amount of work and stuff to even just struggle to survive and pay what you need to pay. And then going further than that, the idea that you have to go do extra things to survive, like demeaning things, degrading yourself, and doing stuff where it's, the system's supposed to be set up in a way that if you have a full-time job, you're covered. That covers the cost of living, especially if you're a couple and you both have full-time jobs. That should definitely cover the cost of living, but we're at a point where even that's not enough. And that kind of dips back into the idea of absurd medical costs and how there's really no option to not pay it, because she literally, if you don't pay, in this case, the $300 per month, she just stops living. She dies. And that is hard not to completely compare that to just something as simple as medication that someone needs every month or something like that, people with certain conditions just need constant medication for the rest of their life, and they're charged through the nose for it in certain places in the world, and that's just something that this is kind of hitting on. But again, even if you don't necessarily have to relate to that specific thing, because maybe you live in a place that has better standards or better control over that, so that you're not being fleeced, it still kind of like ties back into just the regular living cost in general, and this idea that the system is designed to keep milking more money out of you with no sympathy whatsoever for whether or not you have the time to even enjoy life when you're just scraping away, working all the time and torturing yourself just to afford the basic necessities that you need to live. That's very much what the episode's doing. And I think as far as like an episode goes in terms of construction, I think it's really well constructed. I think it sets up a lot of really simple things that it pays off later, which ties into the thematic points. Something as simple as, you know, the little girl that the Rashida Jones gives advice to and says, hey, no, it's cool that you have old shoes. It means they're vintage, and it means this, and it means that. And she gives really good advice. She's a good teacher. And then later in the episode, when she starts doing these ads, when she doesn't know she's doing it, she gives her an ad for new, you know, Nike shoes and says they're only $200 at your local store, blah, blah, blah. And it makes the little girl feel bad. And that's not the only example of her saying some of these weird commercials to kids, which gets her into trouble. The other one, of course, is the kid who's worried about having to, like, run away from his dad with his mum. And she gives, like, advice for, like, a Christian family therapy thing, which also, not even just advertising, it's straight up kind of propaganda at a certain point as well. So, like, these things coming in and kind of paying off, like, earlier scenes that set these ideas up, and then just furthering the idea as well that, you know, we see, like, what a normal anniversary is for this couple at the start of the episode. We see they're kind of loving, they always go to the same stupid place where they got married, this crappy little hotel, they kind of make fun of it together. And then they can't do that anymore because it's outside the cell service range of this service they pay for, unless they pay for the upgrade. And even once Chris O'Dowd starts doing these crazy things online to get tips so that he can afford to give her these things, then it goes a little bit too far because he buys this deluxe version of the package which lets them control her mood and, like, they turn up her happiness. And it's kind of too fake, where she's far too happy. Like, the burger they made fun of together in the first trip, she's now saying it's the best thing she's ever tasted. And it's like it's not really her anymore because she's been manipulated or altered into, you know, whatever it is. And even when they're having sex that night, like, he's like, hey, you're kind of, like, laying it on a bit thick here. It sounds like you're kind of faking all these noises and whatnot. And then even when she gets off of him, she still keeps making the noises. She's still having a great time. He's not even needed. So, and then on top of all these themes, you've got the idea as well that she starts to feel guilty because all of a sudden she's kind of this burden to him because he has to keep working. He has to work double shifts constantly to just afford the basic thing. And even she doesn't even know that he's doing these crazy, like, stunts and, like, dares online and getting paid for it. You know, disgusting stuff. It's set up early in the episode. It's kind of like a Twitch style thing, but it's for, like, making people do really bad stuff to themselves, hurting themselves, drinking their own urine, that kind of thing. And all these things are set up and they're all paid off really well. So I think it's a really solid episode overall. I will say I never quite fell in love with it though. And I don't really have much of a reason why. I don't know if it's just maybe that Black Mirror's been around long enough at this point, and it's been like 15 years of Black Mirror, for the record. Like, this show's been going for a long time now, spread out over the last 15 years. And I'm used to it tackling various things that kind of, you know, talks about various things in our society, how technology's been used. Right early on in the episode, Rashida Jones is giving a lesson to her class, and she's talking about how they've replaced actual bees because they've mostly died off with these nanobot bees that are kind of fulfilling the same role so that, you know, the whole ecosystem doesn't collapse. And it very much set up that theme early on before I even knew she was going to be injured and where the plot was going. I was like, okay, this is going to be about relying on technology. And it kind of is that, but it's like relying on technology that's been heavily controlled by a corporation who can then milk you for everything it's worth, and you're kind of shackled to it. And that's always been kind of truth. But even before subscription services, there's always been an element of that. There's always been an element of being shackled to the system and how you're supposed to survive in that system. You know, whether that's paying, you know, extraneous bills, that kind of thing. And every time something's wrong, they go to the company to find out what's going on. And she's basically like, yeah, it's because we got a new tier, so we've introduced ads in this one. That's what's happening. Oh, you're sleeping longer. Oh, that's because we have to have the lower tiers asleep longer so that we can run the servers at full capacity for the higher tiers. Also, you're not going to feel rested when you sleep because you're not really asleep. You're in sleep mode. Your brain's being used for us to help run the other servers. So if you want to actually feel rested, you're going to have to sleep normally on top of that. So basically, you've got no time left. And that even ties into the idea of working so hard to afford what little you can, but then you've got no time, free time to actually enjoy living with what you do have. And that's like another big theme in this episode. And all of this is handled pretty well. Like, they're both likable people. It's sort of presented in a very natural way where even when they do have like a little bickering fight or something, which doesn't happen often, but when it does, it feels like it's built up at a nice moment where it feels very realistic and natural. I think they have some reasonable chemistry. The whole idea, one of the big sort of things that's dropped on them late in the episode is that throughout the course of the story, they've kind of made references to the fact that they wanted to have a baby, but they're not really actively trying constantly. But hey, they're quite happy if a happy accident happens, right? That's the phrase they use. And one of the things they did is they bought a crib maybe too early, and they're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't sell this. And naturally, yes, later in the episode, they do sell it off at one point to get a little bit of money. But the thing that really stuck out to me was when they bring up that they might hope to get pregnant when they're talking to the woman from the company. She's like, wait a minute, are you pregnant? And she's like, no, I'm not. Why? And she seems very concerned about it. And she's like, oh, because pregnancy costs extra. And they're like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, your brain needs to process things a little bit differently. So we have to charge you an extra $100 or whatever a month for being pregnant if you're pregnant. And it's just this like final nail in the coffin of the one little glimmer of hope of something they might look forward to, of something that they might see as an improvement to their life when they're just struggling day to day and they're keeping their spirits up as best they can. That's the one thing that like they had sort of clinging on to, and it didn't even seem like a likely possibility. They're pretty convinced that she's not even able to, but they're still going to let fate take its course in the off chance that maybe it still happens. And then they're told that even if it ever does happen, it's just going to be another financial burden. And they're just, their souls are destroyed systematically over 50 or so minutes of this episode. And they start off relatively so happy, and to see them in this position by the end of the episode is quite depressing, frankly. So, it's kind of it's got some interesting bits to it. I think when she starts doing the adverts like out of nowhere, and they're always kind of relevant to what's happening. So when they're having sex, she starts talking about lube. And he's like, why are you bringing up lube? And she's like, I don't need lube. And she doesn't really get what she said. When she's talking about honey to her the kids in her class, she starts advertising honey-based cereal at them. And it sounds like an ad read. All these little bits, they're kind of amusing. I don't think I wouldn't say they're ever like funny. Like, I never like felt like super I never got properly laughing at any of them. And maybe that's because it's not really supposed to be that funny. It's supposed to be kind of maybe a little bit of dark humor where you're kind of like realizing, and it's you kind of smirk a little bit at it, but it's more depressing than it is anything else. So you're not really supposed to be kind of engaging with it in that way. But like I said, because it's Rashida Jones and Chris O'Dowd, I kind of had this expectation of some level of comedy, and it never really did that, to be honest. It was more misery than it was anything else. As far as I think it's fairly well directed. I think the performances are good. The other big things that kind of pop up here, of course, like I was getting at, is the idea that Chris O'Dowd starts in secret taking part in this really degrading internet thing to get more money, where he'll like say, hey, if I get so much money, I'll do this horrible thing to myself. And it kind of like, it doesn't show you too much of that. You just get like a little bit of it here or there. And there's almost like this other element to it as well, where he keeps a mask on for the most part when he's doing this, but eventually he can't really resist when someone offers him $500 to take the mask off. So he does, right? And then you can see his face, and he holds up this weird glove with like a dildo on it, and he's clearly about to do something to himself with it. I mean, thankfully you don't see it, but when he's at work the next day, and the whole reason we like set this thing up, like the reason why he even knows about this site is because one of his co-workers, who's this immature guy who thought it was funny, was showing it off. He clearly was going to like see this and see that his co-worker was here. So they're all kind of looking at him funny, and he's at like a construction site, he's doing like metal work or whatever, and he, there's a photograph of him with this dildo thing on his hand up there, and Chris O'Dowd gets angry and goes to confront this guy, and like grabs him and says, "You think this is funny?" and like really gets in his face, and it's quite threatening. And it ends up causing an accident because even though they get pulled away, this other character backs away and trips and ends up getting like, you know, not killed, but like getting run over by this like work vehicle, and he's trapped under the tire and he's screaming in pain. So it you know, it takes a bit of a dark turn. I think the interesting part for me in this, though, even though I do think the scene's well performed from Chris O'Dowd, it's interesting seeing him get kind of seriously angry, because again, I don't really associate him with that type of role. It was more the idea that he is being shamed by his peers for making ends meet, and it made me think of like when like the idea of there being shame associated with you trying to do extra things to make money, or taking jobs that people see as beneath them. This idea that if you take a job that someone sees as a common person job, right, to use a phrase that the episode uses, that there's some shame to be associated with that, and they're all looking at him like he's a pariah for lowering himself to do these kinds of things to make ends meet. I think that's an element of that in here as well, and that you know, that comes back to this idea of when they're told that there's now this new plus tier that they get moved up to if they're willing to pay for it, is that the tier they're on, that they started on, is now the common tier. And there is like a little moment where it's like, common? Oh, we're one of the common people now. And it's this idea of like being, you know, punted further and further down the list, right? To be made to feel lesser and lesser. And the only way you can feel more than lesser is if you pay us more money. And that's the only thing we can use to gauge that you're not lesser, that you're of this tier, and that you can go up to this tier. Otherwise you're just a filthy commoner, and that's what you are. So the idea, even though I do think it's a lot of the personal side of their own struggles and trying to make ends meet, and how much of a burden that is on them, and how much it sucks the life out of them, I think that's the main focus of the episode. There is definitely a big part of this as well, which is this idea of the perception, or maybe not even the perception, even though that's definitely a part of it, but more the idea of how you feel in society, how you feel lesser because you can't afford to just do some of the other things that you at least think other people are dealing with easily, even if they aren't, even if they're just pretending, right? We're all pretending that we're doing okay when we're all struggling because we think there's too much shame associated with being, or admitting that we're struggling with these things. Like, that's kind of the like part of what the episode's going for as well. And I think these are all strong ideas. I mean, arguably, if anything, you could say that's maybe a little bit just too on the nose at times, where there's not really a lot of, like, you know, I'm talking about all this as if I'm, like, exploring the subtext, and I think it's debatable how much of it is actually subtext and how much of it's pretty blatantly just being thrown in your face, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it's not like Black Mirror has ever necessarily try to be that subtle. So some episodes are more subtle than others about what they're talking about, but it's always been a show that's been like, hey, we're going to use a little bit of technology, do a story, like a science fiction-esque story with technology that feels that we're on the brink of, and say something about the world using that. And there's no happy ending here. You know, the episode ends like a year after, and it's not, and some time has passed, like 2 years pass in the story, because we go through an anniversary where they can't go to their usual getaway spot because it's outside the service. They actually think they've killed her because they drive past the line on the map, and she just conks out, and it's when they turn around and drive back through the line, she just wakes back up again. But luckily, it's not done any damage. You'd think it would do damage if her brain was just turned off for a couple of minutes, but, you know, seemingly it worked out. But you've got what was it? Where was it going with this? Oh yes, the ending, right? So time has passed, right? There's a couple of anniversaries, and then another year passes at the end of the episode, and he is like lost his job by this point because of the incident at work, because the other guy getting hurt. So he's lost his job because they can't afford the plus tier anymore. She's lost her job because she's saying weird things in ads to kids, so they can't let her stay at the school. So seemingly they're only surviving with him doing more and more crazy, demeaning stuff to make money. Right, he's lowering himself to the pits of society just to make money, and he's bought her 30 minutes for their anniversary of the deluxe thing, right? Because that was one of the things that they did when they did get away for their anniversary. is he paid for 12 hours of the deluxe version, which lets them control her moods, and that's what I was talking about, her feeling kind of fake and feeling like it wasn't really her. Like, even though she's happy, it's not really the true version of her happiness. Because we saw how she was earlier. We saw her be happy but make fun of things and find joy in stuff that, you know, like people find joy in, even though they're not necessarily supposed to. And like in like a nice way. But anyway, he's bought her 30 minutes of deluxe time, and they turn up her Serenity, and they just have like a happy moment outside where she says it's finally time. And I thought she just meant stopping to pay for the service, which would let her die. Instead, she wants him to kill her. And when her time runs out, they've said, I love you, and she asks him to do it when she's not really there, meaning when the ads are playing, because she's not really aware of anything when that's happening. And as soon as that timer runs out, she starts saying ads. She just starts advertising, and he holds a pillow on her face until she dies, and he breaks down in tears. And honestly, what might even feel more sad than that, despite how dark that is and how much like she wanted to die, and him helping her with that to finally not be a burden to him anymore, is that he goes to the room with the laptop, holding like a box cutter or something to that effect, and shuts the door ominously. And we can see that the website that he uses to make money is on the background. Like, this is just how he's surviving now. This is how he makes money. He does awful things to himself because it's the only way he can make money. Now he's kind of in this hole. Like, could he even get a normal job after what happened at the previous one? Like, would they let him back into a normal job? Would they find out about that? And this is the only choice he has. It's kind of almost like that thing that once you've been branded a criminal, you're kind of stuck to just being a criminal because no one will let you rise back out of it. No one will let you back into the other parts of society. You'll just never be trusted again. So now this is the only option he has. Now that he's here, it's just, I think there's a lot of great ideas kind of at play in here. And that's the end of the episode. It does not end on a happy note. It ends in a she's dead and he's trapped in this now, seemingly forever. Because that's the world we live in. It's awful, and it's you know, hits a little too close to home, honestly, in terms of the way things feel that they're going in the real world. Not that Black Mirror's not done that before, but it can be more hopeful in some ways. It can, you know, because I was almost thinking like halfway through the episode, maybe the ending is going to be kind of sweet because they're still going to love each other regardless of all this stuff. Maybe there's going to be like a strong hopeful element to it by the end, and sadly that just really wasn't where it went. It was depressing, it was miserable, and yeah, here it is. So I do think it's a good episode. I do think it's a well constructed episode. I think that it does a lot of good setting up, right? It gives you an example of them being happy, it gives you an example of her being a good teacher, and then shows how all of this like takes that away by seeing how it turns and how she can't do that anymore later on, how they can't just be happy, how they can't go to the same getaway spot, they can't do all these things that they're supposed to do that shouldn't be a big ask. They're not, this is the thing, it's not like they're mad that they can't go onto a cruise ship and live like millionaires. They're asking for fairly simple things. They're doing fairly, you know, normal, like well within the range of expectations that a normal person should feel like they should be able to do without feeling like it's a stress to try and do it. And then even that they can't do anymore. That's the thing. That's you know what really is kind of heartbreaking about it. But that said, like I never like kind of fell in love with the episode and felt like it was blowing my mind or like it was doing something that like was really getting my mind going and making me think about like how genius this episode is because of what it's doing. And some of the best Black Mirror episodes accomplish that. In many ways, it kind of reminds me of last season a lot. And last season of Black Mirror, I was fairly positive on, but not blown away by. Like, but it says something though that the last season of Black Mirror, season 6, the only episode I really remember off the top of my head is the one that I didn't like, which was the bad werewolf one. The 4 that I felt fairly good about, I don't actually remember that well. And I think that might be kind of like where this show is for me in a lot of ways, where it's still pretty solid in doing what it's doing, but it's not really having much of an impact in the way it once did. And I don't know if that's just because it feels like it's, you know, the same bag of tricks over and over again, so it's just lost a bit of its luster, or what, I don't know. Maybe it's simply that like all the things it's tackling are just so more like invasive in our lives in general that we don't need something that's like a subtlety to try, or not that it's that subtle, but you know, like this, I like the subjects this is tackling are something that we're also worried about generally anyway. We don't need a TV show to point it out to us in quite the same way. I guess I don't know if maybe that's part of it as well, but it's still pretty good though. Like it's still a solid, well done episode, good performances. I think the writing's pretty solid and how it sets things up. If I can make one weird observation, and this isn't like a fault specifically of this show, this is something this episode does that I've seen lots of movies and TV shows do. It's basically a trope that I'm starting to like notice more and more because it's kind of annoying me. So in movies and TV have a lot of these things where like it never actually happens like that, but it always happens that way in movies and TV shows. And that is the whole idea that a teacher's giving a lesson to a class and the bell rings in the middle of them giving the lecture about whatever they're talking about. That never happened once the entire time I was in school, because the lecture part where they're explaining the core ideas of whatever subject they're teaching, that's the stuff that was more meticulously planned. That's the stuff that would always start the lesson, and then you'd be doing some work or something based on what you just learned when the bell rang, and maybe it would interrupt that. But like the TV shows and movies make it look like teachers do not plan for their lessons at all. It makes it seem like they're just always caught off guard when the bell goes. Like they're just like too into the lessons, and they've just got bell to bell lectures lined up, and like, oh, we'll just pick up where we left off next time. At least in my experience, that was never how lectures inside the school setting ever worked. It was always, oh no, there's one planned thing to teach you for today. We're going to give you the lecture about that, and then we'll do some work based on that. This idea of like, oh, bells went, oh, I guess we'll continue this next time. I don't know. It's such a movie and TV trope that I just feel like never. It makes teachers look bad at their jobs, frankly. When in my experience, the teachers tended to plan quite well for the time they had for the actual classes, but whatever. It's kind of like turning on the radio and the exact news program about the escaped convict is playing at that time. Or lightning and thunder always syncs up in movies. It's one of those things that just isn't really that true, but just always seems to happen. Anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts on the episode. I don't have like a great deal more to kind of add. I mean, I think there's a lot of solid scenes where you can totally get where it's going once it starts cooking with its ideas. The idea of like this saleswoman who's there to just keep selling them on the tiers and say, isn't that new tier great? Isn't this plus version great where you get these extra things? Isn't it wonderful? It's only $800 on top of your $300. So not like up 500, it's up 800, which is a really shitty way to phrase it because it makes it sound like it's going to be 800 total. No, it's 800 plus 300. It does a good job, like with all of its satirical science fiction elements. It absolutely does a good job with all of that. It's just it's almost like Black Mirror's just got a bit of a shtick, and we're kind of used to it. So some of these episodes that feel more like typical Black Mirror just kind of feel like they're not as special anymore. And I guess that's where we're at. But hey, let me know what you thought of this episode of Black Mirror in the comments. Like, subscribe, all the usual YouTube garbage that we normally tell you to do, because it helps, but whatever. You can support over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Helps keep all the reviews coming. I'll be rolling these out somewhat consistently over the next week or two, when I fit them in. I've got other like shows I'm committed to doing that I need to do as well, but I will try and keep these Black Mirrors rolling. Worst case scenario, one per week, but I'm hoping I'll get 2 done throughout the next week so that, we're getting through them at a reasonable enough pace. But that is my thoughts on this one. So thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?